All right, welcome back to my channel for those who are watching. This video is going to be about history and why history is the most important subject that we need to teach our kids today. So, with that being said, I was a very astute learner of history, American history, world history when it was taught in school, but I've learned a lot more about world history since I've graduated high school in the last 10 years than I ever was taught in school. So this video is going to be about three topics that I didn't really learn about in school that I believe our children need to be taught so they have a better understanding of how today's world works. So the first one was one that I did not learn about at all in school. The Armenian Genocide. Now, this took place before the Holocaust in Nazi Germany during the 1930s and 40s. And it is shocking to me. This took place during World War I, similar to how the Holocaust took place in Germany during World War II, but this predated that by about 20 years, if my notes are correct here. But it took place in an area known as Anatolia, which is present-day Turkey. And what was the cause of this? Because there's always a root cause to everything. During the First Balkan War, the Ottoman Empire suffered a very humiliating defeat. And undoubtedly, people wanted a scapegoat. People wanted somebody to blame. And that area of the world had a very large presence of Islamic people that lived there. But there was also a significant minority of Christians that lived there as well. Well, that minority of people was blamed for the defeat in the Balkan War, which then set off a ripple effect of hostilities and resentment between the Muslims and the Christians in that area. What ended up happening was, sadly, 90% of the Armenian people in that area, the Christians in that area, were either killed or sent away from the land that they had lived in and their families had lived in for generations. This was brutal. It was... there was not as many people that were killed during this, which doesn't make it any less horrific, because the numbers weren't as great as what we saw in Germany during World War II. However, this happened by people slaughtering Christians by hand with knives, axes, farm tools, or essentially just driving masses of people off of cliffs, waiting for people to die by falling to their death off of a high cliff. That's sick. It's sickening. And to this day, the country of Turkey still does not recognize the Armenian Genocide. And that's sad, and it needs to be accounted for. So yes, that was one topic of world history that I did not learn before I graduated high school. Another one that was never really taught was the, I might butcher this because I am not a Russian speaker. It was the Holodomor, the famine in Ukraine during 1931 to 34. This was at the time when the Soviet Union was in full swing. The Communist Party had full control over all agriculture and manufacturing and how everything was produced within the USSR. However, because of the collectivized efforts to ensure equal farming to everyone in the Soviet Union, the collectivization of agriculture led to the starvation of upwards of 5 million people, about 3.9 million of that being people in the region of Ukraine. And unsurprisingly there, when people are hungry and angry at their government, there were uprisings that took place, armed uprisings, because people were hungry and their children were starving and they wanted answers and food, as anybody would. This was also at a time when Russia had just gone through a lot of political and societal changes, and the leadership within the Soviet Union was afraid that there would be another Russian civil war on their hands, which would not go good for the Soviet Party because they were the ones in power. It's also sick that a government would intentionally starve out a population of people under its watch, under its care, for lack of better words. But that's what happened. Also, another note of why trusting the government to provide for you 24/7, not a good idea. And finally, excuse my page turning here, the Great Leap Forward in China. This took place between 1960 and 1962. And this was during a time when communism was sweeping through the Eastern Hemisphere, and Chairman Mao desired to bring all of China into a world-class nation. He wanted China to be on the same playing field and on an international stage as the USSR and the United States. At the time, most of China was still very rural and agrarian. Most people were still farming and had their own family farms and took care of themselves and helped out their neighbors when they needed, which, looking back now, sounds pretty nice. And I see the irony of that, recording that on a smartphone and having fancy lights hung up behind me. However, this Great Leap Forward was not so great after all. Chairman Mao wanted to do away with what he called the four olds. These were old ideas, old customs, old culture, and old habits of mind. He believed that the old ways were holding down the nation of China, and if they did away with those, they would project themselves as a nation into a world-class power. However, that was not the case. This great leap forward that he desired ended up with the death of 30 million people. 30 million people were starved to death because the Great Leap Forward was an utter failure. They too tried to collectivize their manufacturing, agriculture, everything about their country, and sadly 30 million people lost their lives due to it. Now, these three incidents are very dark and depressing, and you might be wondering why I chose these three. I chose these three because they demonstrate what happens when we ostracize one another, when we disregard other people's lives, opinions, livelihoods, and turn solely to the government to handle problems that can be solved by ourselves. The loss of life was due to government incompetence and, in some cases, intentional aggravation to get people angry and hostile with their neighbor. And I encourage you to learn from these events and to not let people get you to a point where we get to the wholesale slaughter and starvation of people that we deem as not significant or the source of our problems. Because it wasn't just Nazi Germany that did it. It was the Armenian genocide. It was the Soviet Union specifically targeting Ukraine, and China's great leap forward that wanted to do away with the old culture that ultimately ended up with the death of millions of people. So, thank you for watching. Hopefully, the next video I do is a little bit more of a positive one. And if you like this, give me a like, a subscribe, and let me know what you think. So, thank you very much. I'll see you next time.